You will remove those eyesores from your roof by Friday, or this association will remove them for you and bill you for the crane. That was Brenda Coyle, president of the Ridgeline Crest Homeowners Association, for 9 years running. Standing on my gravel drive in white sneakers that had never seen gravel, reading from a clipboard about the 12 solar panels I had bolted to my own south-facing roof on my own deeded 11 acres. She said it the way a person says a thing they have practiced in a mirror. My name is Walt Brennan. I am 61 years old, and for 34 years I worked as a substation engineer for the regional electric cooperative that serves the whole valley, including the 42 houses of Ridgeline Crest sitting in the bowl below my ridge. What Brenda did not know, what she never once bothered to check in the 3 years she spent trying to pull my land into her little kingdom, was that the power feeding her entire block did not come from the big utility she assumed. It came across a private distribution easement and a substation tap that I had helped design, that sat on ground I had first right to buy, and that was about to come up for sale. So, let me ask you something, before I tell you how this went. If a woman stood on land that was never hers and told you to tear the panels off your own roof by Friday, and you happened to know exactly where her electricity came from, what would you have done? I should back up, because the panels were not the start of it. They were closer to the end. I bought the ridge in 1991, the year my wife Carol and I got married. 11 acres on the high shoulder above the valley floor, with a spring, a stand of ponderosa, and a view that ran 40 miles on a clear day. The man who sold it to me was an old rancher named Pell, who had run cattle on the high ground his whole life and wanted it to go to somebody who would not subdivide it. We sat on his tailgate for an hour before he named a price, and he asked me what I did, and I told him I built and fixed the things that move electricity, and he nodded, like that was a respectable answer, and he said the only thing he asked was that I keep the spring open for the deer. I have kept it open for 34 years. We built the house ourselves over 3 summers. Carol drew the floor plan on the back of a feed store calendar, the kind with a different mountain photograph for every month. And she would not let me throw it away even after we had proper blueprints drawn, because she said the blueprints were the engineer's house. I poured the footings in the first summer, and we framed in the second, and the south slope of the roof was pitched at the angle it was, for 2 reasons that were really 1 reason. Carol wanted the morning light to come into the kitchen across the valley, and I wanted, even back then, a roof that someday could hold panels at the right tilt for this latitude. I ran the math on a legal pad at the kitchen table while she painted the trim, and I told her the pitch would cost us a little in headroom upstairs and earn us a great deal in light, and she said that sounded like the story of being married to me. I was an engineer. I thought in decades, she thought in mornings, and between the 2 of us the house came out right. Carol passed 4 years ago, in the spring, after a winter that took her quickly enough that the speed of it was its own cruelty. I kept the calendar with her floor plan, folded in the kitchen drawer, next to the good scissors. And I kept the promise we had made standing in the unfinished frame, with the rain coming through, where the roof was not yet on, which was that nobody, no bank, no county, no committee, would ever stand on this ground and tell us what we could do with it. I made that promise to a woman who is gone. And a promise to the dead is the only kind a careful man cannot file away and forget. It sits on top of the cabinet, not inside it. Ridgeline Crest came later, in 2004, when a developer carved the valley floor below my ridge into 42 lots and called it a community. My land was never part of it. My deed predates their plat by 13 years. My parcel sits outside their boundary by a wide margin, and not 1 acre of mine was ever subject to their covenants. I knew that the way I knew my own name. I had the deed, the survey, the recorded plat, showing the association's lines stopping. A good 200 feet short of my fence, I keep things. That is the part of this story that matters more than any single moment of it, so I will say it once, plainly, and then show you. I keep things. Every letter, every notice, every photograph. Carol used to laugh at the gray filing cabinet in the shop and call it my second wife. After 34 years of writing after-action reports on substation faults, where a missing timestamp could cost a man his job or his hand, keeping records stopped being a habit and became something closer to a moral position. The first contact was friendly enough, or it pretended to be. This was the autumn of 2022. A Tuesday, late afternoon, the light already going gold over the far ridges. Brenda drove her white luxury SUV up my gravel, the one with the vanity plate that read HOA QUEN, which I am not making up and never could. She had a younger man with her. She introduced as Dell, the association's compliance coordinator, a title that does not exist in any law I have ever read. Brenda wore a magenta blazer and pearls and held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "We're doing a community standard SWAT co," she said, "and your property reads as part of the Ridgeline Crest viewshed. The board feels the metal building and the equipment are inconsistent with our aesthetic harmony guidelines." I was standing at my own gate with a coffee mug in my hand. My dog, a blue heeler named Tess, sat at my boot and watched the SUV the way she watched coyotes. "My property isn't in your association," I said. "Never was. The line stops down at the cattle guard." Brenda smiled the smile of a woman who has decided facts are a negotiating position. "Functionally," she said, "you're part of our jurisdiction. You share our road. You share our view. The board will be sending formal guidance." I told her the road was a county easement and the view belonged to whoever was looking at it. Dell wrote something on his clipboard. They drove off, and I went inside and pulled a fresh manila folder from the gray cabinet. And I wrote on the tab in marker Ridgeline Crest HOA, and under it the date, and I clipped in a note of exactly what was said. That was Incident 1. I did not know yet that I would need a count, and the engineer in me started one anyway, because that is what the engineer in me does. That same autumn, my daughter, Nora, came to live with me. She was 15 then, my late brother's girl, and after her own mother's situation fell apart, the family agreed she would do better on the ridge with her Uncle Walt than anywhere else. She was quiet and sharp and suspicious of everything, which I respected. She had Carol's habit of watching a room before she trusted it. The first week, she found the gray cabinet and asked why an old man kept 30 years of paper, and I told her that paper does not forget, and people do. And she nodded, like that was the most reasonable thing she had ever heard. She started helping me file. By winter, she could date stamp a notice faster than I could. The first formal notice came in January of 2023. Tuesday again, in the mailbox at the bottom of the drive. A violation letter on association letterhead, citing my non-conforming outbuilding and unapproved exterior modifications, demanding I submit an architectural review application and a $400 fee within 30 days. There was no outbuilding question in it, not really. There was a woman who had decided my 11 acres were a stain on her view, and a line item in something larger I could not yet see. I did not pay the fee. I wrote a one-paragraph reply, stating my parcel was not within the association's recorded boundary, enclosed a copy of the plat with their own line highlighted, and sent it certified. I kept the green card when it came back. I clipped it into the folder. Incident 2. Here is the thing I had not told Nora yet, the thing that would matter at the end. The reason Ridgeline Crest had electricity at all was a substation tap and a 3/4-mile private distribution line that ran from the cooperative's main feeder, crossed a corner of old grazing ground, and stepped down to serve the 42 houses in the bowl. I knew that line intimately. I had been on the design team that built it in 2005, the year after the development went in, because the developer had not wanted to pay the cooperative's full extension cost and had instead financed a private spur with a recorded easement. The spur and the little pad-mounted substation sat on a 2-acre utility parcel that had been carved off and held by a holding company that I happened to know from 34 years inside the cooperative was winding down. That parcel and the easement rights that ran with it were quietly going to come up for sale. And the original agreement, the one I had a copy of in a federal blue binder because I had drafted half its technical appendix, gave the adjacent landowner a right of first refusal. The adjacent landowner by survey was me. I want to be careful here. I did not lie in wait like a spider. In the winter of 2023, I was a widower with a teenage niece and a violation letter I had answered with a plat map, and I assumed, the way reasonable people assume, that facts would settle it. They did not. The notices kept coming. February. A second violation. The fee now doubled to $800. March. A letter from the association's attorney, a man named Pruitt, on nicer paper, threatening a lien. I wrote back each time, certified, plat, enclosed, line, highlighted. 3 replies, 3 green cards. The folder was getting fat. Nora drew a little staircase on the inside cover and started numbering the steps because I had told her once that bullies always climb and you only have to keep count. In May, the escalation changed character. And that is when I understood there was money under it. A grading crew showed up on the county road below my property and began surveying for what a stake flag called PHAC2. I drove down and asked the foreman what Phase 2 was. He said the development was expanding, 40 more lots up the slope, and that the association president's husband was the principal Coyle, Marcus Coyle of Coyle Ridge Development. That was the first time the husband entered the picture, and it reframed everything. Brenda was not a busybody with a clipboard. Brenda was the front office of a man who needed my ridge, or at least needed me gone and quiet, because Phase 2 could not pencil out without the high ground and, more to the point, without expanding the power capacity to the upper slope. And the only practical way to expand that capacity was to upgrade the very substation tap that sat on the parcel coming up for sale. The parcel I had first right to buy. I did not say any of this to Brenda. I said it to Nora at the kitchen table with the calendar floor plan on the wall behind us, and she looked at the federal blue binder and then at me and said, "Uncle Walt, do they know what you used to do?" I told her I did not believe they had ever once asked. She smiled for the first time in a week. That summer, I put up the solar panels. 12 of them. On the south slope, Carol had pitched for exactly this, tied to a small battery bank in the shop, so that when the valley lost power in a storm, which it did most winters, the ridge stayed warm and Nora could do her homework by a real lamp. I pulled the county permit. I am a permit man. The inspector, a calm woman named Reyes from the county building office, signed off in July and complimented the conduit work. I filed the permit and the inspection card in the folder. I had no idea the panels would become Brenda's favorite obsession, but they did because they were visible, and a thing she could see from the bowl was a thing she could not abide. The fake inspector came in August. A Thursday, around 10 in the morning, hot already. The cicadas going in the Ponderosa. Welding A man in a reflective vest and a hard hat with a laminated badge on a lanyard knocked at my gate and announced he was conducting a regional code compliance inspection of my electrical installation and needed access to my shop and roof. He had a clipboard too. Everyone in Brenda's world had a clipboard, like it was a uniform you could buy. I set my coffee on the gatepost and asked to see the badge. He held it up without taking it off the lanyard the way a man does when he is hoping you will not look closely. I looked closely. It read, Rigeline Crest Compliance, in a font somebody had clearly bought online, with a little seal in the corner that was not the seal of any government I have ever paid taxes to. There is no such agency. I have spent my entire working life around real inspectors, men and women whose authority is written in state code, whose forms carry statute numbers in the footer, who hand you a card and a citation number and tell you which subsection you are looking at. A real inspector is bored. A real inspector has seen 1,000 roofs and wants to see yours and leave. This man had a lanyard and a nervous swallow and kept glancing back down the drive. "Sir," he said, "this is just a routine safety check. The association received a report of an unpermitted high-voltage installation." "It's permitted," I said. "County permit signed off in July. It's photovoltaic. It's bonded and grounded. And the inspector who passed it complimented the conduit. You can inspect my property the day a court orders it and not 1 hour before." I took 3 photographs while he stood there deciding what to do. One of his face, one of the badge on the lanyard close enough to read, and one down the drive of the white SUV, idling at the cattle guard with Brenda sitting in the passenger seat in her sunglasses, watching, not getting out, because getting out would have put her name on it. Tess came up to the gate and stood at my left boot and made a low sound in her chest. That is not a growl exactly, but is the thing that comes right before one. And the man took a step back off the gravel and said he would note my refusal to cooperate. He left. The SUV pulled out ahead of him. Photographs filed that afternoon with the date and the time written on the back of each print in pencil. By Nora's staircase on the inside of the folder cover. That was incident number 9. That was also the day the constrained officer entered the story, and I want to be fair to him because the niche of this whole sorry business is that the officers are not the villains. His name was Deputy Hank Salas, County Sheriff's Office, and he came up the next afternoon because Brenda had called in a complaint that I had threatened an inspector. Hank was about 40, tired, decent. He stood in my drive and explained. The way a man explains a thing he half hates having to explain, that when a complaint is filed, he has to roll on it regardless of merit, and that I should understand the association was papering a record against me. "They're building a story, Walt," he said. "Best thing you can do is build a better one. Dates, photos, every contact. If they ever cross a real line, you'll want a pattern a prosecutor can read in 5 minutes." I told him I had 9 incidents in a folder and a green card for every letter. Hank looked at the folder, then at me, and something in his face settled. "Keep doing exactly that," he said. He wrote his own report straight, noted no threat occurred, and gave me his card. I filed the card. He told me, before he left, that it usually took a documented pattern of a half-dozen clear bad faith acts before the office could treat the complainant as the problem. I had 9. I just needed one of them to be a crime. Through the fall, the staircase kept climbing. September, the association recorded a lien against my property for $2,400 in unpaid fines and fees, a lien with no legal foundation because they had no jurisdiction, but a lien that would cloud my title until I spent money to clear it. I drove to the county recorder's office the day the copy reached my mailbox and read the filing standing at the public counter. Pry. It cited covenant sections by number, sections that governed lots within the plat, applied to a parcel that was not within the plat. It was the kind of document that is wrong, in a way only a person who reads documents can see, which is to say, it was the kind of document that works on most people because most people do not read. I requested a certified copy, paid the fee, and filed it. Incident 10. October. The County Planning Commission held its hearing on Phase 2, and Brenda stood up in the public comment period and characterized my property by name as a non-compliant holdout, degrading the Ridgeline Crest community. Bring the upper parcels into proper standards and aesthetic harmony. She wore the magenta blazer. She had note cards. I sat in the third row in a clean-pressed shirt with my hands folded, and I said nothing because a man defending himself at a microphone looks like a man with something to hide, and a man sitting quietly with a binder on his niece's lap looks like exactly what he is. Nora sat beside me and held the binder and watched the back of Brenda's head the way Tess watches a coyote work a fence line. That was the second time Brenda voiced it in public, in front of a body that kept a transcript, the holdout, the standards, the proper. I let her say all of it. I have learned that the most useful thing an overreaching person can do is repeat themselves on the record. What Brenda announced at that hearing, almost as an aside near the end of her time, was the piece I had been waiting 3 years to hear someone say out loud. Coil Ridge Development, she told the commission, had secured the utility infrastructure necessary to power the expansion, and she said it with the confidence of a woman reading a fact off a card her husband had handed her. She meant the substation tap. She meant the 2-acre utility parcel and the private distribution line. She was telling a public body on the record in a room with a court reporter that the deal was as good as done. Nora wrote the exact phrase in the margin of the binder and underlined it twice without my asking. She had understood before I said a word that a thing said on the record is a thing that can be measured against the truth later. It was not done. I knew it was not done because 2 weeks earlier I had received, as the cooperative had been required by the original recorded agreement to send, formal written notice that the holding company intended to sell the utility parcel and its associated easement and tap rights, and that the adjacent landowner of record held a right of first refusal with 60 days to exercise it. The notice had come to my mailbox in a plain envelope with the cooperative's return address. Nora had brought it up the drive with the rest of the mail and set it on the kitchen table on top of a seed catalog, not knowing what it was, and I had opened it standing up and read it twice and then sat down very slowly, the way you sit when a thing you have known for years finally arrives wearing a date and a deadline. Nora asked me what was wrong, because my face must have done something, and I told her nothing was wrong, that something was right, and that I needed a day to be sure before I said it out loud. I did not gloat. I did not call Brenda. I did not so much as drive past the White House. The next morning I drove to the cooperative's office, where men I had worked beside for 3 decades pulled the file from the vault and laid it on the long table in the records room, and I read every page of it again the way I would read a relay setting before I energized a bus. The easement was real and recorded a permanent grant running with the land. The right of first refusal was real and recorded, written into the original 2005 infrastructure agreement in language I recognized because I had argued for half of it. The sale price was set by the agreement's own formula, the holding company's depreciated book value of the improvements, which after 20 years of depreciation came to $41,000. $41,000 for the parcel, and the tap, and the easement feeding an entire development and a planned 40-lot expansion. It was the bargain of the century, and it was a bargain precisely because nobody on Brenda's side had read the document closely enough to know the right of first refusal existed, or that it belonged by survey and by recorded deed to the stubborn old man on the ridge they had spent 3 years trying to paper into submission. A young woman in the records office named Patty made me a certified copy of every page, and I drove home with the file on the passenger seat where a person would sit, and I did not speed. I exercised it. I signed the papers on a Wednesday at a title company in town, with Nora in the waiting room doing homework. I wired the funds from the account Carol, and I had built $1 at a time for 34 years, the account that had been meant for a roof we already had and a trip we never took. The recorder stamped the deed 11 days before the hearing that ended all of it. I now owned the substation tap, the 2-acre parcel, and the easement rights for the private distribution line that fed every one of the 42 houses in the bowl below my ridge, including the white house with the HOA Queen plate in the driveway, including the planned upper slope where Marcus Coyle intended to set 40 more. I told no one but Nora and the cooperative. I did not change a thing. The power kept flowing into the bowl exactly as it had the day before. Every furnace and water heater and Christmas string in those 42 houses, pulling current across a line an old man on the ridge now owned outright. The lien still clouded my title, and the panels still sat on my roof, catching the low winter sun. And Brenda still believed, because no one on earth had told her otherwise, that her husband's company controlled the infrastructure she had bragged about into a court reporter's record. I want to be honest about why I waited. Because a person could mistake it for cruelty. And it was not. In 34 years of switching high-voltage gear, I learned one rule that never failed me, which is that you never throw the breaker until the load is on it. You do not act on the document the day you have it. You wait until the other side has committed every ounce of their weight to the bus, signed the financing, stood up in the public hearing, sent the men with the bolt cutters, and then you let the recorded fact do the work, quietly, in front of a neutral authority, so that no one can ever say you forced the outcome or moved a single thing out of spite. The fact was already true. It had been true for 11 days. I only had to let her run into it. She committed the weight in December. This was the morning of the Friday she had named in my driveway. The panels by Friday. And she did not come alone. She came up my gravel at 8 in the morning in the white SUV, with Dell in the passenger seat, and behind them a flatbed truck, with 2 men I did not know, and the 2 men climbed down, and one of them carried a long pair of bolt cutters, and the other carried a portable generator and a coil of cable. I watched the whole thing from the shop window, with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. Brenda had decided, on the authority of a clipboard and 9 years of nobody telling her no, that my solar system was an unpermitted hazard, and that the association had the right to make it safe, which meant disconnecting my tie-in at the shop, and I would later learn. Leaving me, dark in the middle of a mountain December, with a 16-year-old in the house. The frost was still on the gravel. Their breath showed. They cut the chain on my gate. That is the line. Up to that morning, every awful thing Brenda Coyle had done lived in the gray country of bad faith civil. Overreach, the place where a person can do real harm with paper and still claim they were only following a process. The moment those bolt cutters closed on my gate chain and the links dropped onto the frozen gravel, and 2 men stepped onto my deeded ground to lay hands on my electrical service without a permit, without a court order, without a particle of lawful authority, criminal trespass and tampering with a utility. And I had every second of it on 4 cameras saving to 2 separate drives. because a year before Nora had stood in this same shop and asked me why a man so careful about paper did not have a single camera. I called Hank. I did not yell. I said, "2 men with bolt cutters just cut my gate and are on my property to disconnect my electrical service. I have it on camera. You said you needed a line. This is the line." He said he was 9 minutes out. I walked down to the gate with Tess and stood in front of the 2 men, not touching them, not threatening them, and I said the only thing I said to anyone that whole morning: "You're on my land. The cameras are running." I'd stop. Brenda told me to step aside, that the association was exercising its right to abate a hazard. Dell looked at the cut chain on the ground and went a shade of gray that had nothing to do with the cold. That was the 3rd time Brenda voiced it. The right, the jurisdiction, the standards, and it was the last time she ever voiced it to me, because Hank's truck came up the drive with its lights going, and the morning turned into something she could not read from a clipboard. Hank put the 2 flatbed men against the truck. He took my cut chain into evidence. He watched 90 seconds of camera footage on my shop monitor, and then made 1 phone call. And here is where it stops being a confrontation and becomes the thing this niche actually pays off on, because nothing was settled by anybody shouting. It was settled by paper, in a public office, in front of a neutral authority who recognized what she was looking at. The county scheduled a hearing for the following Thursday to address the lien on my property and the trespass complaint. And word travels in a valley, so the small hearing room had the Planning Commission's clerk, an assistant county attorney named Miss Port, Okafor, Deputy Salas, the association's lawyer, Pruitt, Brenda, and Marcus Coyle, and a back row of Ridgeline Crest neighbors who had started, over 3 years, to wonder about the woman they kept electing. I came with 2 things. I came with a gray folder, 3 years thick, every notice and green card and photograph and the footage of the cut chain. And I came with the federal blue binder and a single recorded deed, stamped by the county recorder 11 days earlier. Ms. Okafor first addressed the lien. She asked the association's attorney to identify the legal basis for asserting jurisdiction over my parcel. Pruitt stood and began to talk about community standards and viewshed in the spirit of the covenants. Ms. Okafor asked him plainly whether my parcel was within the recorded boundary of the association's plat. He looked at his papers. He did not answer. I slid my survey and the association's own plat across the table, their line highlighted in yellow, stopping 200 feet short of my fence. Miss Okafor looked at it for about 4 seconds. "This parcel is not within your association," she said to Pruitt. "Every notice, every fee, and this lien were issued without authority. The lien is void." She instructed the recorder to release it. 3 years of letters, 11 incidents on Nora's staircase, $2,400 in fines, and the count of dollars the association had ever lawfully been owed by me was 0. Then Marcus Coyle made his mistake, because men like Marcus cannot sit in a room where they are losing and stay quiet. He stood up before his own lawyer could stop him. He said the panels and the parcel were beside the point, that Phase 2 was approved infrastructure, and the expansion would proceed regardless of one man's grievance, and that the development controlled the power capacity for the entire slope. He said it to the room, for the neighbors in the back row, the way his wife said things, for mirrors, the voice of a man who has never once had a document turned over in front of him. Pruitt put a hand on his sleeve. Marcus shook it off. I opened the federal blue binder. I did not stand and make a speech. I am not built for speeches, and the file did not need one. I laid one document on the table in front of Ms. Okafor and slid it to the center where the clerk and Deputy Salas could both see it, and I said, in the same flat voice I would use to read a meter. That is the recorded deed to the utility parcel and the distribution easement that feeds Ridgeline Crest and every lot of the proposed Phase 2. It was recorded 11 days ago. The right of first refusal that let me buy it was written into the original 2005 infrastructure agreement, the one Coil Ridge Development signed. I was the adjacent landowner of record. The price set by the agreement's formula was $41,000. The room was very quiet. Somewhere, a chair creaked and stopped. Miss Sapst, Okafor picked up the deed and read it, line by line, the way a person reads a thing she intends to rely on. She turned to the easement page. She read that, too. She set the page down flat and squared its edge with one finger, and she looked up. Not at me, at Marcus Coyle. And she said the sentence that ended it in the flat tone of a person stating a fact already on the record. Then the infrastructure for your expansion is owned by the man you have been fining. Nobody clapped. It was better than clapping. It was the sound of a whole room understanding a single thing at the same moment, a kind of pressure leaving the air. Pruitt sat down without being told to. Marcus Coyle's face did the arithmetic in real time, the financing, the slope, the 40 lots that were now a field with no path to power. And Brenda, for the first time in 3 years, had nothing on her clipboard that could help her, because the clipboard had never been the power in the room, and now every neighbor in that back row could see what the power had actually been the entire time. It had been a recorded document, signed and dated, and kept, sitting in a gray cabinet and a blue binder on a ridge above their houses, waiting for someone to commit enough weight to make it speak. The consequences were proportionate, and they were not mine to hand out. I did not have to lift a finger. Phase 2 died within the month, because a 40-lot expansion with no path to power is not an expansion, it is a field. And the bank that had pledged Marcus Coyle his construction financing reads recorded deeds for a living. The financing collapsed. The assistant county attorney referred the cut chain trespass and the fraudulent inspector badge to her office. And Brenda and Dell were charged, she with directing a criminal trespass and tampering with utility infrastructure, he with impersonation. I know she resigned the presidency she had held for 9 years before the next association meeting, because a board does not keep a president under indictment for cutting a neighbor's gate. The new board, half of them from that back row, sent me a short letter. It did not mention standards. It asked politely whether I intended to keep their lights on. I wrote back one line. I told them the power would keep flowing exactly as it always had, at the cooperative's published rate, because I was not in the business of doing to people what had been tried on me. I keep things. I do not become them. I want to tell you about the day after, because that is the part I keep for myself. It was a Saturday, clear and cold, the panels on the south slope, throwing back the morning light Carol had pitched the roof to catch. Nora came out to the gate with 2 mugs of coffee, and handed me one, and looked down at the bowl. At the 42 houses, with their lights and their furnaces and their morning kitchens all running on a line. An old man on the ridge now owned and had no intention of touching. She did not say anything clever. She was 16 by then, and she had watched the whole climb up the staircase she had numbered on the inside of a folder cover, and she had learned the thing I most wanted her to learn, which is that you do not have to shout to win, you only have to be right and keep the receipts. She leaned on the gatepost where the cut chain had hung and where a new chain hung now, and she said, "Aunt Carol would have liked how quiet it was." And I said yes, she would have, and we drank our coffee, and Tess sat at my boot and watched the valley the way she watched everything, and the calendar with the floor plan was still folded in the kitchen drawer behind us, And the promise we made in an unfinished frame 34 years ago was still kept. So here is the lesson, plainly, because I told you at the start I would give you one. When somebody with a clipboard and a borrowed title tells you that your own ground is functionally part of their kingdom, do not argue with them in the driveway. Do not let your blood pressure do their filing for you. Go pull your deed, walk your survey line, and find the markers. Get a copy of every recorded easement, agreement, and covenant that touches your land, and read the boring parts, the appendices, the rights of first refusal, the clauses written by tired people decades ago that everyone else has forgotten. Keep a folder. Date every contact. Photograph everything. Send your replies certified, and keep the green cards. Put up the cameras before you think you need them, not after. The people who overreach almost never check the documents, because checking is work and bullying is easy. And that gap between what they assume and what is actually recorded is the whole ball game. You let them run full speed into a fact that was sitting in a drawer the entire time. The deed is older than the claim. The record does not forget. Be the person who kept it. If you've got a story like this, an HOA or a board or a clipboard that decided your land was theirs to manage, put it in the comments, because I read them, and so does Nora. If this one was worth your evening, subscribe so the next one finds you. And next time I will tell you about the retired county surveyor, Two Valleys, over whose HOA repainted the property pins in the night to swallow a strip of his pasture, and what happened when he dug up the original brass monument the county had set in 1958. Until then, go find your deed. Walk your line. Keep your folder.